So Games Workshop just put out a new article on Warhammer Community. It's got an interesting title. 4 new Citadel tools are about to make your Warhammer hobby better than ever. Better than ever, huh? Well, that's a bold claim. Let's see if it holds true. Now, in my personal experience, the products that Games Workshop sells under the umbrella tools and modeling are much like an iPhone. They look really cool, but quite frankly, they're overpriced and they underperform. Damn it, I use an iPhone. Luckily, our hobby has grown in recent years, so we get a wide variety of options out there for our hobby tool needs. And maybe that has just lit a fire under Games Workshop, so their new tools are actually good. Today we're going to find that out exactly, because I'm going to put these 4 brand new Games Workshop tools through the paces, pitted against the tried and true tools that I use on a day-to-day basis to find out if they're innovative and if they actually perform for their cost. The first one here is called Super Fine Detail Cutters. So these are just sprue clippers. First reaction, they're nice and heavy. They have a nice spring action to them. It's very smooth. Now, I've got a couple of different ones that I use. This is the old cheap Citadel one that came included in their box sets right here. I've got my Tamiya clippers, which are usually my go-to when it comes to really tight and exact cuts. And then I also have these Monument Hobby ones, which I've recently purchased, and they're pretty darn good as well. And they're the closest looking to the new Games Workshop one, although they just have this little spring here that showed. I don't know exactly how this cutter, how the science works. I'm not a springologist. So let's just get right to it here and see how they work. I'm going to pin them head to head against the Tamiya ones. Those are my current favorite. They're also one of the more expensive ones on the market. I'm going to start by using my Tamiya ones just to kind of remind myself of how clean and crisp they cut, and that way I'll have a good baseline kind of in my brain before I use the new thing, and be able to make a good comparison there. One thing that makes these Tamiya ones so nice is just how thin the edge of this blade is. Now, I used to have a pair of God hands, which are even more expensive than these Tamiya ones, and they're even thinner on the edge of the blade width. But the problem is that when they're metal and that thin, they're really brittle and really easy to break. So if you're not careful, these ones with the thin tips, you can really mess them up if you don't use them on things that they're made for, which are just this kind of plastic. If you ever felt like you can't find the right little bit on your sprue to clip out for the next thing you're trying to make, try to do it when you're filming yourself, because you will never find what you're looking for. Where is his damn head? Alright, I think that's the entire model for the Tamiya one. There is a little bit of a burr that it leaves behind, depending on how tightly you want to push it to it. I like to leave a little bit of that still there so we can clean it off later and I don't gouge into the model, but it does get right up and close and into those hard to reach spots. I was wondering why I was having trouble really focusing, because I was wearing my glasses, and I never wear my glasses when I paint or build models. So now, before we start using the Games Workshop one, I want to show you something I just realized. Look how much longer this section of the metal is than the Tamiya ones. That means we're going to be able to reach in a little bit further with these, which I think is actually a pretty nice feature. Sometimes I can't quite get to right where I want to when I'm trying to clip off a little section of sprue. Alright, on immediate use, I can say they seem to work fairly similarly, although they don't seem to be quite as crisp of a cut. And what I mean is there's almost a feel when you're using these about how much they're like just pushing the plastic as opposed to how much they're actually just straight cutting through it, because they're very sharp. These don't seem to be as sharp as the Tamiya ones, and I wonder if we can even see some pinching on the models. You know, not really. It looks like the final product is fairly similar to those, and so it depends on what you'd value more when I'm comparing this to the brand that I typically like to use.
Do I prefer to have a little bit longer of a reach into some hard to reach spots, or would I like to have an even sharper, straighter edge? I don't have the exact pricing of the new Games Workshop tools. I did ask them, and they are going to get that back to me. If they do get it back to me before this video goes live, you'll see it down on the screen right now to show the MSRP. My guess is that this sprue cutter is going to retail for about $35 USD. In the research that I did of their old tools, most of them fell in that range between 30 and 40. The Tamiya ones do retail at 40 bucks. However, you can get them pretty regularly for 30 and maybe even $25 on Amazon. So you're actually saving a little bit with the Tamiya ones. I will say that there's a noticeable difference in the size, and the God Hand ones have the same issue. They're very small in the hand. So if you have bigger hands, or if you're going to be building models for a long time, like you're clipping out like 30, 40 models, this is going to cramp up your hand. It's done it to me before. When I was building those 120 zombies that I did for the video you can see up in the top right of your screen right now, if I had to say which one I would use forever going forward, I think I'm going to need more time with this. But honestly, that's not a bad sign for the new Games Workshop ones, that they seem to compete as long as their price is reasonable. All right, next tool we're going to try out is the hobby knife. And a good old craft knife, hobby knife, whatever you want to call it, X-acto blade. Those have been around forever and don't need to specifically be for our hobby, although there are plenty of them on the market out there by hobby companies. I use a number of different ones here, and they're all pretty respectable at their job. I've got a cheap old one. I've got this one with a nice rubber grip on it. I've got this one that's got a nice guard, and I keep a nice sharp blade on this one for really exact cuts. And then I also have this one by Monument Hobbies as well, which is great because you can just simply slide it back in and keep it safe. And it's easy to switch the blade out with this one as well. All right, let's take this guy out and take a look. Well, this is an interesting looking animal right here. It does have this interesting, almost pencil-like handle hold with a groove in the side here for your thumb. That's pretty cool. And this little turnstile here seems to be how you get the blade in and out. Am I loosening it or tightening it? Oh, I think I tightened it. So next thing we're going to do is we're just going to trim off. We're going to compare one of the ones that I use. We'll use this Monument one here, and we're going to compare trimming off the little burrs. That's the majority of what I use my hobby knife for. Okay, one thing to keep in mind is as I'm cutting here, I'm not actually going to pay much attention to how well this blade cuts because they all use the exact same blades. What I want to focus on is how well is my grip. All right, let's switch over to this new Games Workshop one. Now this is a brand new sharp blade, so if I am going to cut myself today, this is probably going to be where it happens. One thing I'm finding I do like about this one is it has this little bit of an overhang that hangs out about a ½ inch over the top of the blade, and I can kind of put my pointer finger high up on that for more control and precision. I never really thought about that before, but compared to the X-acto standard blade where they always just keep them fully exposed on the top, this is actually really nice. It's a small thing, but I'm really feeling that the ability to kind of grip up on it higher allows me a lot more control. Makes sure that I don't have to like push super hard to get through the burr and kind of overextend and gouge into a different part of the model or gouge into my finger. All right, after having worked my way through an entire model with this new one, I do really like this knife. It is basically just a knife like any of the others, but I do really appreciate the extra control and the ergonomics on the handle. Does that mean it's worth the price that they're charging? Again, I'm not sure exactly what the price is going to be. My guess would be around 30 bucks, maybe 25, maybe 35. But the Monument one here with the retractable blade is only 11 bucks on their website store, and you can get these nice firm rubbery grip ones from X-acto for about 10 to 15 bucks as well. So if it ends up costing twice as much as the other blades, I probably wouldn't spend my money on it. Although if it is priced similarly, so let's say this thing is $15 or $20 maybe, I could see potentially picking one up.
Today's video is brought to us by Broken Anvil Miniatures, who's proud to unveil their upcoming miniature offering for all of your tabletop gaming needs. Forged Adventure Series 1, and it's coming to backer kit crowdfunding on October 25th. The Forge Master, great deity of all interdimensional creation, welcomes you to enjoy his massive menagerie of unique handiworks from across the multiverse. He has hand-selected only the finest quality creatures, heroes, and villains to inhabit your tabletop realms. For just $119.99, you'll become the proud owner of an enormous collection of highly detailed RPG miniatures in pre-assembled plastic. We're talking over 100 minis, folks, and that's just the beginning. The Forge Master has so much more in store for you, like these amazing add-ons. And as the project funding increases, hosts of new and exotic creatures will be added to the collection for your enjoyment. With over 40 stretch goals planned, there's a potential to end up with well over 200 models total, and that's at no additional cost. October 25th cannot come soon enough. If you want to stay in the loop on this project, sign up for Forged updates by clicking the link below. Lastly, if you've had your eye on any Broken Anvil models, I've got some exciting news. You can now purchase their resin minis directly from the BAM web store, and they're offering all of you 20% off until October 22nd with the code BAMLOVESNinja. So check out the links to the BAM store and the Forge sign up down in the video description. Now let's get back to that video.
All right, we got blades done. We got clippers done. Let's move on to the notorious Mouldline Remover. And I got a little story to tell you about the Mouldline Remover. I have the old one by Games Workshop. When I painted one of my very first models, it was for a competition for a local store. I painted a Stormcast Eternal model. And with that model, I placed in the store competition and I got a store gift certificate. And with that gift certificate, I purchased this. The name is Mouldline Remover. I thought this thing would work so much better than a regular hobby knife because it was designed specifically to remove mold lines. So what these things actually are basically a J-shaped machined bit of metal. So the edges of them are quite sharp. Not so sharp that you'll cut yourself, but they are going to be able to just slide over the model and remove that edge. The problem is if you've ever used one of these, or you can probably guess by watching me use it right now, is that you have this kind of thick, fat surface that's trying to get into these tiny little cracks and details in folds up in this dwarf's undercarriage right here. And you just don't hit those things. Like, you just can't reach them. Which brings us to the new product. It does have that ergonomic handle as well, similar to the hobby knife. So maybe this would be better. I kind of wish this bump where you kind of have your fingers grip in there was closer up. Because the closer you are to the tip, just like when you're holding a paintbrush, the closer you put your fingers to the tip, the more fine control you have. You're going to want that on a tool like this as well. All right, this guy's got a nice long mold line that runs all the way down the back of his leg and up the other side. Now this new mold line remover has got a more narrow tip, meaning that I think it could reach more places. But look, in the inside of his knee pit right back here, this whole back side, I can't reach any of that. And if I were to just use my dull blade here, I got so much more control. I can get it in one or two swipes. I can get even into the tiniest crevices here. I don't have to worry about stabbing or cutting the model because the blade is dull. So if you were going to buy one of these things to help your kid from not cutting themselves, just take an old hobby knife that's dull as can be, that's not going to stab them. This one I even have the tip snapped off, so they're not going to stab or cut themselves. And you can get this for like $3 at the dollar store. But I feel like there's a bunch of other tools that kind of do a similar purpose to these mold line removers that I use instead. I use sanding sticks, I use bits of sandpaper, I use these little tiny hobby files to get into small areas. Specifically if there's bigger bits of burrs I need to sand down, these little hobby files are great. Final thoughts on this. I remember buying this original mold line remover. It cost $35 back then. I'm guessing this one's gonna cost a similar amount of money. It is honestly, in my opinion, not worth it whatsoever. I just think the tool It seems like a good idea, but it's just a poor design in practice. All right, we have one more tool to discuss today, and that would be our hobby drill. Now, I've got this good old hobby drill I've used for forever, and there are nicer ones. This one is kind of really basic. This Games Workshop one looks a little fancier. It has a similar kind of tightening and loosening mechanism that the hobby knife has. That is looks like the exact same part from the manufacturer right there. All right, looks like it comes with two different size drill bits for you to drill. Obviously, there's going to be two main purposes for this. One is to drill out your gun barrels like every good Warhammer player should do. And the other thing is to drill in things that you either want to pin or maybe even pin and paint with. Simply hold it there, spin it, see if I'm going too tight or too loose. It looks like I'm going tight here. Well, what's happening? Uh-oh. I broke it. Apparently I was not twisting the right direction. Crisis averted. We have the drill bit inserted. This is kind of weird to me. So this thing has got the swivel back, which is a really nice thing. My one here doesn't have this. The purpose of this is you can hold it in the palm of your hand and you can turn the drill like this with your hand. Where my fingers hit, just have to deal with this whole big plastic thing around the metal thing here. If it's good enough for carpentry, it's good enough for barrel boring, and that would be a pilot hole. What we're going to try to do is use this old airbrush needle here to poke a little hole right in the exact center of that gun barrel. That's where our bit is going to catch, and that way we'll be right down the middle of the barrel if I did it right. Because we don't go super deep inside of these gun barrels, just enough to throw that shadow in there to make it look like they're drilled all the way down. I'm not too worried about being perfectly smooth and perfectly level inside of that barrel. So there we go. We've got one done right there. That's with my old one. Just make sure that, ow! Well, I did stab myself today. Surprise, it was with the pin vise. I mean, this thing does rotate around my palm fine. I just have to make this weird shape with my fingers to do it. It's honestly less ergonomic and smooth than the cheap one that I use. But we're not done there. There is a different tool, and if you've watched my channel before, if you've seen my other tool videos, you probably are familiar with this thing called the Wow Stick. Now this thing is low speed, high torque, meaning that's going to smoothly go right through that plastic or resin with very little resistance due to its power, but it's not going to spin oh so fast. It's going to cause errors, going to make things slip over the place or do what you don't want it to do. Place the drill right up to it here. Just tap the button. And we're through. So yeah, this thing is just a godsend. One of my favorite tools that I've found in the last couple of years, and I use this for every time I need to use a hobby drill. Now granted, this thing is not cheap. It's probably 50 bucks, maybe a little bit more or less. I'll put a link down to that in the video description below, as well as all the other alternative tools that I use that I'm showing here today. If you didn't want to spend the extra money, literally any cheap pin vise you can get anywhere else is going to do the same job that this thing does. So if I was going to rate these from worst tool to best out of these four, I think the worst one is the Mouldline Remover. I just think it's a terrible tool. It just doesn't do what it was designed to do. So this is my 4 out of 4. 3 out of 4, I guess, is probably the drill. The drill doesn't seem to do anything new or special. There are plenty of other drills that you can get for 10-15 bucks on Amazon that do something very similar. Now when we get to the second to best one and best one, I'm kind of at a loss here. I think these two tools, the super fine detail cutters and the knife, are actually solid. I wouldn't give either one of these the leg up over the other, which is better. I think they're both okay. If I had to rate them both, I'd give them probably each a solid 7 out of 10. The biggest concern with the blade is, I think, probably the cost for what it does. And the biggest concern with the Sprue Cutters is not actually the cost, because I think it's probably going to be appropriately priced. It's actually a very solid tool. I like the feel, I like the weight, I like the size of the grip and the handle. It's just slightly not sharp enough. You could maybe sharpen it on your own at home if you've got a knife sharpener, but solid, not amazing, but I wouldn't be sad if I bought one of these.
And that seems like a good place as any for us to conclude our in-depth look at these 4 new Citadel tools. I appreciate you hanging out with me today, especially because you stayed all the way to the end of the video. And I have to give a special shout out to all the members of the Ninja on Patreon. It's because of you that I can do videos like this. So if you wanted my eternal gratitude as well as access to some fun rewards like my weekly hobby and quick tips videos, as well as access to my Discord where we can chat hobby any day of the week, the Patreon is the place to do it. I'm going to see you back here again real soon. And between now and then, make sure you find time in your day to slay the gray.